Welcome to Cupid's Corner, where love stories come alive. Sit back, relax, and let the tales of romance sweep you off your feet.
Vinyl Record Romance. Chapter 1. A Rainy Encounter. The rain poured down in sheets, drumming relentlessly against the pavement. Louise pulled her coat tighter around her as she hurried along the sidewalk, her umbrella bending dangerously against the wind. She squinted through the downpour, trying to read the street signs, but everything looked the same in this unfamiliar part of town. Why did I take that turn? She muttered to herself, frustration tinging her voice. The sound of rushing water filled her ears, drowning her thoughts. Just then, something bright caught her eye, a small, dimly lit shop with a sign that read Eddie's Vinyl Records. The bell above the door tinkled softly as she pushed it open, the warmth inside wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. The rich scent of old vinyl and polished wood filled the air, a nostalgic aroma that brought a smile to her lips. "Welcome," a voice called from behind the counter. Louise looked up to see Eddie, a 72-year-old man with a shock of white hair and a saxophone resting against a stool beside him. His eyes sparkled with a warmth that made her heart flutter slightly. "Looking for something special?" he asked, a hint of mischief in his tone. "Just looking for a place to stay dry," Louise replied, shaking the rain from her umbrella. "I'm Louise, by the way." "Eddie," he said, extending a hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Feel free to browse. We have a little bit of everything. You a fan of jazz?" "Only a little," she admitted, glancing at the rows of records lining the walls. "Mostly classical, but I do enjoy a good saxophone solo." Eddie chuckled, the sound rich and inviting. "Then you're in for a treat. I've got some great jazz records that might change your mind." "Really?" Louise raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you recommend?" Let me show you." He stepped around the counter and waved her to follow him. "This way." As they walked, the sound of rain pounding against the windows created a rhythm that matched the lightness in her chest. Louise found herself laughing as Eddie playfully imitated a saxophone riff, his hands dancing through the air. "Brum bap bap," he exclaimed, then broke into a wide grin. "See? You just need to let the music in." Louise laughed, a lilting sound that seemed to brighten the dim shop. "You're quite the entertainer, Eddie." "Only when I have an audience," he replied, his eyes twinkling as he pulled out a record. "Here, try this. John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. It's a masterpiece." Taking the record into her hands, Louise felt a rush of nostalgia. "I remember listening to this with my husband, back in the day. We'd dance in the living room, twirling around until we were breathless." Eddie's expression softened. Love has its own rhythm, doesn't it? Even the rain can't wash that away." "True," she said, her voice turning wistful. "But it's been years since I've danced with anyone. Why not start again?" Eddie suggested, a glimmer of excitement in his voice. "Life's too short to let the music fade away." Louise met his gaze, the warmth in his eyes igniting a flicker of courage. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I can. Let's make a deal," Eddie said, leaning in slightly. "You help me pick out some records for the shop, and I'll teach you a few jazz steps. What do you say?" Louise felt a rush of laughter bubbling up. "You've got yourself a deal, Eddie." The rain continued to pour outside, but inside Eddie's shop, something new and promising began to bloom. Chapter 2. The first note Louise wandered through the aisles, her fingers brushing against the records. Each cover was a snapshot of a world she had barely explored. She paused at a section labeled jazz and picked up an album with a colorful cover, the bright hues contrasting sharply with the dim light of the shop. That's a classic," Eddie said, appearing at her side with a grin that lit up his weathered face. "Miles Davis. Ever listened to him before?" Louise shook her head, a hint of shyness creeping in. "I'm more of a Beethoven fan." Eddie's eyes sparkled with mischief. "How about I play you a track? You might be surprised." Before she could protest, he gently took the album from her hands and led her to a cozy corner where a vintage record player sat like a well-loved friend. He carefully placed the album on the turntable, a tender ritual that made Louise smile. As Eddie lowered the needle, the room filled with the smooth, sultry sound of trumpet notes that seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her, eager to catch her reaction. Louise nodded, her eyes closed, savoring the music. "It's enchanting." She swayed slightly, letting the rhythm pulse through her. The notes danced, weaving together a tapestry of emotions she hadn't felt in years. Eddie watched her, a satisfied smile on his lips. "See, just a little jazz can change your perspective," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Maybe you're right," she admitted, opening her eyes to find him studying her with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "It's different, but I like it." "Good. Now, let's try something else." Eddie moved to the shelf, pulling down another record. "This one is a bit more upbeat. You might want to dance." "Dance?" Louise echoed, a mix of excitement and apprehension bubbling within her. "Remember, I haven't danced in ages. Just a little two-step. Here, let me show you." He set the new record on the turntable, the lively beat filling the air. Eddie stepped closer, extending his hand. "Come on, Louise. You can't let the music sit idle. Feel that rhythm." She hesitated, glancing at his outstretched hand, then back at the record player. "What if I trip?" Eddie chuckled, a warm, inviting sound. "Then we'll laugh about it. Life's too short to be serious all the time." With a deep breath, Louise took his hand. It felt firm and reassuring. "All right, but only for a moment." "Perfect." Eddie grinned, guiding her into a simple two-step. "Just follow my lead." They moved together, the music swirling around them. Louise felt her initial nervousness melt away with each step. "Like this?" "Exactly. You've got it." He twirled her gently, and she couldn't help but laugh, a sound that rang clear and bright, echoing against the vinyl-covered walls. "Rum bat bat," Eddie explained, mimicking the saxophone riffs while they danced. Louise giggled, the joy of the moment washing over her. "You're quite the entertainer, you know." "Only when I have a willing partner," he replied, his eyes twinkling. The song shifted, and the tempo slowed, allowing them to catch their breath. Eddie's hand lingered on her waist, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. "See? Dancing is just like jazz, unpredictable, but oh so fun." Louise smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I think I might just become a jazz fan after all." "Good." Eddie beamed, his enthusiasm infectious. "And who knows? Maybe we can even host a little dance night here." "Now that's an idea," Louise said, her spirit soaring. "I might need a few more lessons first, though." "Deal," Eddie said, his voice softening. "Just promise me you won't wait too long to dance again." "I won't," she promised, the warmth in his gaze igniting a flicker of hope within her. The rain still beat against the windows, but inside Eddie's shop, something new and vibrant began to bloom. Chapter 3. Weekly Sessions. The bell above the door chimed softly as Louise stepped into Eddie's shop, a familiar thrill coursing through her. The air was thick with the scent of aged vinyl and dust, a comforting embrace that felt like home. She spotted Eddie at his usual spot, nestled among the records, his fingers brushing the labels with a reverence that spoke of years spent in the sanctuary. "Hey there, my favorite jazz aficionado," Eddie called out, his voice warm like the sun breaking through clouds. "Hello, Eddie," Louise replied, her smile brightening the dim space. She made her way to their cozy corner, the same worn-out couch where they had shared their first dance. "Ready for another musical adventure?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Absolutely. What do you have in store for me today?" Louise settled onto the couch, curling her legs beneath her, feeling a sense of anticipation bubbling inside. Eddie grinned, grabbing a record from the shelf. "How about a little Duke Ellington? He's a master of blending melodies and emotions." Louise leaned forward, intrigued. "I've heard of him, but I can't say I know much about his music." "Then let's change that." With a flourish, Eddie set the record on the turntable. The crackle of the needle meeting the vinyl sent a shiver of excitement through her. As the music surrounded them, she closed her eyes, letting the notes wash over her. "This is beautiful," she murmured, swaying slightly. "It's so rich and full of life." "Just like you," Eddie said softly, watching her with an intensity that made her heart flutter. Louise turned to him, surprised. "Me? Absolutely. You bring a light into this place. I think Jess needs more people like you." He chuckled lightly. "So, tell me more about your time at the library. Any interesting stories?" "Oh, plenty." Louise laughed, the sound bright and melodic. "Just last week, a little boy insisted that our library was haunted. He was convinced the ghost of a librarian was checking in books at midnight." Eddie threw his head back, laughter erupting like a joyful trumpet solo. "That's fantastic. I would love to hear that story in full detail." "Maybe next week," she teased, her eyes dancing. "You still owe me a dance lesson, remember?" Yes. I'll get my dancing shoes ready." He winked, then his expression turned thoughtful. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, what's your favorite classical piece?" Louise's face lit up. "That's easy. Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. The way it captures emotion is just magical." "Now that's something I'd love to hear," Eddie said, leaning closer. "Maybe we can find a way to blend jazz with classical? How cool would that be?" "Very cool." Louise replied, her excitement palpable. "It would be like a musical conversation." As the music played on, they shared snippets of their lives. Eddie's youthful escapades on stage and Louise's quiet, yet rich experiences among books. The hours slipped by unnoticed, each moment deepening their bond. "Louise," Eddie began, a hint of nervousness creeping into his tone. "I've been working on something. A composition. For you." Her heart skipped a beat. "For me?" The surprise in her voice was genuine. Eddie nodded, a blush creeping across his cheeks. "You've inspired me. I want to create something that blends our love for music." "Wow, Eddie, that's incredible." She felt a swell of emotion, a warmth spreading through her. "What kind of music will it be?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," he admitted, scratching his head. "But I wanted to reflect both of our styles. Something that captures our journey together." Louise's breath caught in her throat. "I can't wait to hear it." Eddie smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made her heart flutter. "Neither can I." As the jazz filled the room, they fell into a comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of music and the promise of what was to come. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them, two souls discovering the beauty of companionship in their golden years. Chapter 4. The Composition. The soft glow of the shop's lights cast a warm ambience as Eddie prepared for the evening. The usual clutter of records and music memorabilia felt more intimate, more alive, as he set the stage for something special. He wiped his hands on his apron, glancing at the clock. She would be here any minute. Just as the minute hand reached the hour, the familiar chime of the doorbell echoed through the space. Louise stepped in, her face lighting up when she saw Eddie. "Eddie!" she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Great you're here," he replied, unable to suppress his smile. "Tonight's a bit different. I have something I want to share with you." "What is it?" Her curiosity was palpable as she stepped closer, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Come on back," he gestured toward the small listening area he had set up. "I've been working on that composition I mentioned." Louise's heart raced. "You mean the one you were writing for me?" Eddie nodded, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Yes. I wanted to make it a surprise. Here, put these on." He handed her the headphones, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief moment that sent a thrill through them both. "Okay, I'm ready," she said, settling onto the couch, her legs crossed beneath her. With a deep breath, Eddie pressed play. As the music filled her ears, Louise closed her eyes and felt herself wrapped in sound. It was a beautiful blend of jazz and classical elements, each note weaving together like the threads of their conversation, their laughter, their shared moments. The melody danced softly, then soared, echoing the way her heart had come alive since meeting Eddie. "Oh, Eddie," she whispered, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "This is breathtaking." Eddie stood nearby, watching her response with a mix of anxiety and hope. He had poured every part of himself into this piece, wanting it to resonate with her spirit. As the final notes lingered in the air, Louise slowly removed the headphones, her breath catching in her throat. Eddie, it's incredible. Thank you. Really? You like it? He stepped closer, the tension in his shoulders easing. Like it? I love it. Her voice trembled with emotion. You've captured so much, our laughter, our conversations, the way we dance through life together. It's perfect. His heart swelled with pride. I wanted it to reflect us. I wanted you to feel what I feel when I'm with you. Louise's eyes shimmered as she smiled, a warm, radiant glow that made Eddie feel like the luckiest man alive. You've succeeded, Eddie. This means more to me than you can imagine. Good, he said, his voice slightly husky. Because you mean everything to me. She leaned forward, her hands clasped together. You really found a way to blend jazz and classical. It's such a unique sound. Eddie chuckled, scratching his head. I thought about how you've brought a new rhythm to my life. It's like jazz, free, improvisational, full of surprises. But there's also a structure to it, like classical music. It just made sense to me. Louise laughed, a bright, melodic sound that filled the room. You're quite the romantic, Eddie. Only for you, he replied, his gaze steady, filled with sincerity. She took a deep breath, a mix of joy and nervousness swirling within her. I can't believe how far we've come since that first dance. Me neither, he said softly, stepping closer, their fingers almost touching. Eddie's heart pounded as he took the final step, closing the distance between them. Louise's breath hitched, her eyes locking onto his with a mixture of anticipation and tenderness. The world seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in the warm glow of the shop's lights. Louise, Eddie whispered, his voice trembling slightly. There's something I've been wanting to do for a while now. She smiled, her eyes softening. What is it, Eddie? He reached out, gently cupping her cheek with his hand. The touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. This, he said softly, leaning in. Their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss, a sweet exploration of newfound feelings. The kiss deepened, growing more confident as they melted into each other. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and longing. When they finally pulled away, breathless and smiling, Louise rested her head against his chest. I've wanted to do that since the first time we danced, he confessed. Louise laughed softly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Me too, she admitted. It was perfect, Eddie. Just like your composition. The moment hung between them, charged and electric, as they both realized that their lives had harmonized into something beautiful, something worth exploring together, note by note. Chapter 5. Unexpected Fame. The following week, the shop buzzed with an energy Eddie had never experienced before. The doorbell chimed incessantly, each ring punctuated by the excited chatter of customers. Eddie stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface for the third time that hour, his heart racing at the thought of what had transpired. Hey, Eddie! A familiar face appeared at the door, followed by a gaggle of wide-eyed teenagers. Can we hear that song again? Eddie chuckled, feeling a warm rush of pride. Sure, just give me a moment. He glanced over at Louise, who was organizing a stack of vinyl records. The way she moved, deliberate and graceful, made his heart flutter. Louise, you ready for another round? Always. She called back, her eyes sparkling. She had embraced this newfound attention with the kind of joy that made Eddie's chest swell. Just as he hit play on the speaker, the door swung open with a loud thud, and a group of reporters barged in, cameras at the ready. Eddie, Louise, one shouted, her voice slicing through the music. Can we get a quick interview? Louise exchanged a glance with Eddie, her laughter bubbling up. Looks like we're popular, she said, her eyes wide with excitement. Yeah, I guess so, Eddie replied, his heart skipping. Let's give them a show. The reporters crowded around, their microphones pointed eagerly at the couple. How did you feel when you found out your music went viral? A young man asked. Eddie rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at Louise for support. Honestly, it was surreal. One minute we were just two people enjoying music, and the next we're being asked about it by everyone. Louise finished, her laughter infectious. It's like something out of a movie. A reporter leaned closer, intrigued. What's the story behind the composition? Eddie looked at Louise, his heart swelling again. It's a love letter of sorts, he said, his voice steady. I wanted to capture the essence of what we felt together. Beautifully said another reporter, jotting down notes. And what inspired the unique blend of jazz and classical? Louise jumped in, her enthusiasm lighting up her face. Eddie's amazing at capturing emotions. Jazz is spontaneous, much like our journey, while classical provides a structure, a foundation that holds everything together. Eddie smiled, touched she remembered his words. That's exactly it. It reflects the rhythm of our life together. A shout from the back of the room interrupted the conversation. Hey, Eddie, can you sign this? A fan held out a record with trembling hands. Of course, Eddie responded, moving to the front of the counter. As he signed, he noticed Louise chatting with another group of fans, her laughter ringing out like a melody. Do you think this will change your lives? A reporter pressed. Louise turned back to Eddie, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. I think it already has, she said softly, but it's up to us how we navigate this. Fame can be a distraction, but our love for music and each other will keep us grounded. Eddie nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Exactly. We want to share our passion, not get swept away by it. What's next for you too? Another reporter asked, their curiosity palpable. More music, definitely, Eddie replied, his gaze settling on Louise. And maybe a few more surprises. As the questions continued, Eddie felt a sense of calm wash over him. Despite the chaos and the cameras flashing, the world outside faded, leaving only the warmth of Louise's presence beside him. When the last reporter finally left, Eddie turned to Louise, who was still beaming. I can't believe we just did that. Louise laughed, her joy echoing in the now quiet shop. I can. You are amazing. I'm so proud of us. Us? He echoed, stepping closer. This is all because of you, Louise. You've inspired me in ways I never thought possible. Together, Eddie. We did this together. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. As they stood in the soft glow of the shop, surrounded by music and the chaos of newfound fame, Eddie realized that their love was the true melody of their lives, a song that would only grow sweeter with time. Chapter 6, a new beginning. The chatter in the shop had quieted, leaving a comfortable hum in the air. Eddie leaned against the counter, a soft smile on his face as he surveyed the rows of vinyl records lining the walls. The shop had transformed into a local haven, filled with laughter and warmth, thanks to the whirlwind of attention they'd received. The doorbell chimed occasionally, a reminder that the world outside still pulsed with energy. Louise was rearranging a display of records, her fingers dancing over the album covers. You know, I never imagined this little place would become so popular, she said, glancing over her shoulder at Eddie. Her smile lit up the room. Me neither, Eddie replied, his heart swelling. But I wouldn't want to share this with anyone else. He stepped closer, resting his hand on the counter. It feels like a dream, more like a beautiful reality, Louise corrected, her laughter bubbling. It was a sound that wrapped around Eddie like a warm embrace, and he couldn't help but join it. True. You always know how to keep me grounded. He chuckled, watching as she continued to organize the records with a delicate precision. I'm glad we still have our weekly listening sessions, though. It keeps the chaos at bay. Exactly. Just us and music, she said, her eyes sparkling. What's on the playlist for tonight? Eddie leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over him. How about something soulful? Maybe some Ella Fitzgerald? Yes, she exclaimed, her hands clapping together in delight. She always lifts my spirits. Let me set the mood. As she moved to the speaker, Eddie felt an ache of contentment settle in his chest. It was incredible how much he cherished these moments together. Once the music filled the air, he took a seat at their favorite corner table, the one draped in soft light from the string bulbs above. "Come here," he beckoned, patting the seat next to him. Louise joined him. Her presence radiated comfort. "What is it, Eddie?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, a curious smile playing on her lips. "I've been thinking." He took a deep breath, his heart racing. "These past few months have been the happiest of my life. I never thought I'd find someone who understands me the way you do." Her expression softened, a mix of surprise and affection. "Eddie, you're making me blush," she said, her cheeks turning a lovely shade of pink. "I mean it," he continued, squeezing her hand. "You've brought so much joy into my life." Tears sparkled in her eyes. "Oh, Eddie, you have no idea how much that means to me." Gathering courage, he leaned closer. "I want to spend the rest of my days with you, Louise. Will you be my partner in music and in life?" Eddie reached into his pocket and pulled out an engagement ring. The ring was a masterpiece of elegance and simplicity. At its heart was a 1-carat oval-cut diamond, its elongated shape and rounded edges giving it a timeless allure. Eddie's heart raced as he slipped the ring onto Louise's finger, the diamond catching the light and sparkling brilliantly. They both stared at it for a moment, the reality of their engagement sinking in. Louise's eyes filled with tears of joy as she looked up at Eddie, her smile radiant. "Eddie, it's perfect," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears. "Just like you," he replied softly. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, the world around them seemed to disappear. Eddie leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was a kiss that spoke of their love, their commitment, and the beautiful future they were about to build together. Louise's arms wrapped around Eddie's neck, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. She could feel the warmth of his love surrounding her, making her feel safe and cherished. The kiss was a perfect blend of sweetness and intensity, a promise of all the wonderful moments yet to come. When they finally pulled away, breathless and smiling, Eddie rested his cheek against hers. "I love you, Louise," he murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you too, Eddie," she replied, her heart overflowing with happiness. "You know, Louise, you just made me the happiest man alive." They sat there for a while, hand in hand, soaking in the reality of their promises as the music played on. The soft notes of Ella intertwined with their laughter, creating a melody that felt like the beginning of something beautiful, an endless journey together. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a few customers stepped in, their chatter breaking the spell. "Hey, Eddie!" "Louise!" one shouted, waving excitedly. "Is it true you're going on tour?" Eddie exchanged a glance with Louise, a grin spreading across his face. "Looks like we're in for a new adventure," he said, excitement bubbling within him. Together, Louise added, her smile radiant. As the shop filled with eager voices, Eddie felt the weight of the world shift. No matter what lay ahead, he knew he had found the perfect partner to face it with, music, love, and laughter guiding their way. The end.
Thank you for listening. Let's spread the love. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Because everyone deserves a bit of romance.